Welcome to another episode of
Translate
Translate
This.
This with
Richard.
and Melissa. And we are a podcast about language, life, and culture, and
The hilarity of it all.
yes, the hilarity of it all. Well, we tried it. We think we're funny.
We think that's the whole point.
We
We don't need to worry about everybody else.
We're just having a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are extremely excited today. So, for those of you who don't know our format, basically, Richard has no idea what I'm going to present. Today's my presentation day. And when I present, he doesn't know what the topic's going to be. And when he presents, I don't know what the topic's going to be. But we are doing something special today because on Translate This, this is our first ever live guest. We're so excited.
Special guest.
And not only just a special guest, a person that I have a great deal of respect for, who is incredibly accomplished, who is in it every day for the whole basis of our industry.
I'm excited.
Oh, you should be. You should be
Great.
very excited. And not only that, but
Mhm.
he's a really funny person.
Awesome.
So I'm so
It'll
excited.
be 3 funny people.
It'll be 3 funny people. Woohoo! All right. Okay. So let me tell you what we're talking about today.
All right.
We are going to be discussing language advocacy.
Okay.
Do you know what that is?
I like both words. I don't know if I use them both together, but I like both of them.
Okay, well, by definition, language advocacy, and of course, this is one definition. You could probably find several, but this one is a comprehensive effort to serve as a state voice for language related issues and raise public awareness of benefits of learning languages in order to influence the direction of present and future education.
I think he probably made sure that all of us language teachers still have jobs.
Exactly. That's exactly
Thank you,
it.
Bill.
That's exactly it. So, yes. So, without further ado, we have Dr. Bill Rivers, and he is of WP Rivers and Associates. And he also is the language advocacy advocate on special counsel for us for the Association of Language Council. The Association of Language, I said that wrong.
Okay.
The Association of Language Companies.
There you go.
I got so excited that I'm like,
That's
oh
okay.
my gosh.
We're like kids in here.
We are like kids in here. But no, this in particular is very important for me to tell the listeners that we have somebody that is every day helping our industry be able to construct all of the barriers within what we do. And we always are trying to make sure that we have somebody that can champion different things that come across our industry and what we need to do. So I'm going to read you his resume.
All right.
He has more than 30 years experience in the language advocacy and capacity at a national level, with significant experience in cultural and language, economic development and national security, and publications in second and third language acquisition research, proficiency assessment, program evaluation, and language policy development and advocacy. He is the immediate past and founding chair of the ASTM Technical Committee F43 Language Services and Products and chairs the U.S. Technical Advisory Group to the International Standardization Organization, Technical Committee 232 on Education and Learning Services. He is the secretary to the U.S. Technical Advisory Group to the International Standardizations Organization, Technology Committee 37 on Language and Technology, and having served in that role since 2012. Bill serves as a member on the America's Language Working Group of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and is an honorary member of the Association of Language Companies, and a recipient of the ALC Bill Graper Award in 2019. And for our listeners who don't know, Bill Graper founded the Association of Language Companies, and it is our most prestigious award to receive. And it keeps going.
Amazing.
Wait, Richard,
All
it keeps
right.
going. It keeps
All
going.
right.
He serves on the American Translators Association Education and Pedagogy Committee and is a founding member of the Bridge Initiative of the ALC. And he works in both initiatives to link the K-12 academic world to the language industry, promoting internships to the industry, to academia, and assisting academic institutions in securing adjunct faculty and improving the curriculum for translation and interpreting in the nation's high schools, community colleges, and universities. And before establishing his current role as WP Rivers and Associates CEO, he served for 8 years as the executive director of the Joint National Committee for Languages, the JNCL as we call it, the National Council for Languages and International Studies, a nonprofit language advocacy organization, doubling its memberships and revenues, and leaving a legacy of significant legislative and policy accomplishments, including the establishment of the Congressional Caucus on America's Languages, the passage of the World Languages Advancement and Readiness Program, the reauthorization of the Esther Martinez Native American Languages Preservation Act, and the passage of legislation restricting the use of price based acquisition methods in federal procurement of knowledge based services, and the establishment of the Commission on Language Learning of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, among many others. While at the INCL NCLIS, he led advocacy efforts to expand language learning programs of all types, leading INCL NCLIS to join the National English Learner Roundtable and the America's Language Working Group of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And prior to all of that, he served as chief scientist at Integrated Training Solutions, which is a small business in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and Arlington, Virginia, where he founded or focused on strategic planning, management, and advanced technologies for language and cultural programs in the public sector. And while at ITS, he served in a contractor role as the chief linguist of National Language Services Corps, a field activity of the OUSD, with oversight of all language issues in the NLSC. And prior to working ITS, he was a founding member of the Center of Advanced Study of Language, which is CASL, at the University of Maryland, and the nation's first federally funded research center for language, cognition, and national security, where he led the less commonly taught languages area and served as special assistant to the executive director. And prior to CASL, he was a researcher at the National Foreign Language Center, NFLC, at the University of Maryland from 94 to 2003, and leaving as the assistant director. But during his career, he also, I don't even know how he finds the time to do this. He also taught Russian, beginning through advanced levels, graduate courses in research methods, language policy, and second language acquisition at the University of Maryland, worked as a freelance interpreter and translator for English and Russian, and conducted fieldwork in Kazakhstan, where he regularly returns to teach graduate courses and supervises dissertations as a visiting professor at the Al Farabi Kashak, I'm saying that wrong probably, National University. And he received his PhD in Russian from, and Bill, how do I say that? Bryn Mawr? And I think that's how you say it, Bryn Mawr College. And his MA and BA in Russian and his BS, this is fascinating, in aerospace engineering from University of Maryland. He speaks Russian, French at the C1 level, and Irish, German, and Spanish at the B1 level.
Amazing.
Mic
Yeah.
drop.
Is he like 200 years old?
Yeah, I know. You would think.
Wow.
Yeah,
On behalf of all language instructors, he's probably our god without knowing.
that's what I say.
Yeah.
That's why I was so excited to have him come on the show today,
Mhm.
because his background alone
Mhm.
is just it's just amazing. And there he is. And that's exactly why
It's
we have
this
him
you were
because
reading something that was going on for a really long time, and I was like, God, what a pisher that guy is. I mean, well, it just means that I've been working this for a long time, and that I apparently have a problem focusing on any one thing because I've done a lot of different things. So, you know, it's but it's a very kind introduction, and I'll try to live up to it. But yeah, so language advocacy. You guys are going to
yeah,
start with
we
some
got some
questions. You're going
questions too. Well,
to, all
the
right, let me
first
have
thing
it.
I want to know. Well, first of all, you missed the thing where Richard said that you're apparently our language god because for language trainers, you've done more than anybody that
No,
we
no,
know.
no.
But I want to know. My first, when I read this, I didn't know about your bachelor's degree in aerospace. I want to know what made you change careers from that to language.
So sure, when I was when I was a teenager, with all the wisdom and and hubris of being 17 or 18. I thought I was going to build the Starship Enterprise, right? Um, but I grew up bilingual. My father spoke some French at home, and he grew up bilingual, Quebecois French. Um, and I had taken French throughout my schooling. The very first sentence that was presented to me in kindergarten on these old little view graph things, where you put a film strip in, looked into a hood, and you advanced it, and made a sound, right? Um, there'd be a beep on the cassette recording when you're supposed to advance the film strip. Was le focus sur table.
Haha.
I went home, Papa, pourquoi est-il le focus sur table aujourd'hui?
Mhm.
Why? And it's literally the seal is under the table. It's like they wanted to top la plume de ma tante sur la table, right? Which is, the kind of the way that language was being taught in the 70s. And all I can say is whoever wrote this stuff, they were on some good, they knew how to enjoy their free time, because it was psychedelic. So then I went to high school and I took Russian. They had Russian at high school, and it was a math teacher who was Ukrainian American. He's a first generation son of immigrants. And he's also had a certificate to teach Russian. And he went to the principal when I was a freshman and said, "I want to teach Russian." And the principal said, "Well, sure, as long you can combine your lunch break and your prep break, and we'll give you can use that slot for teaching
Wow.
Russian," which was the principal's way of saying no, no, don't. And Mr. Chalipko, being kind of stubborn himself, said, "Sure, I can do that. Do some weight." And we had this Russian program, which was 4 levels in one room. It was our little one-room
Wow.
schoolhouse, and the 6 people that I went through Russian 1 through Russian 4 with, all ended up doing something with the language,
Wow.
either for
Mhm.
one of the 3-letter agencies in
Mhm.
DC, or going on like I did, and another guy did to get a PhD eventually in Russian. But so I go to University of Maryland. It met all the criteria. It had a Russian major and an
Mhm.
engineering major. And I was like, maybe I'll add a Russian major. It was, and it was paid for. The single biggest
Yeah.
criterion, it was paid
That's
for.
great.
And this is, back, yeah, and even, yeah, I've got a son in college now, so I know what this
You're
is like.
bleeding
Um,
cash.
about 3.5 years in, I had enough credits to declare a Russian major. I wasn't, I did it without telling people in the School of Arts and Humanities I was also getting an engineering degree, and vice versa, because I had asked and neither was going to let me do it, so I just did it. But then I had the opportunity to go to graduate school in engineering, graduate school in Russian, or to get a job. I had a job offer in aerospace engineering. And my advisor, my undergraduate advisor, the late Donald Hitchcock, who told me something to my 22-year-old mind was just a thunderbolt. Um, I can't tell you what you should do.
Mm.
I can't tell you which choice you should make, but you should do what you like.
Wow. Wow.
And that completely upended that day, and sort of wandering around. It's like, wow, I really do like linguistics and language a lot more than I like
Mhm.
engineering.
Mhm.
Not that the engineering hasn't been of enormous help in my research career in terms of being able to handle large scale statistics and manage large projects and
Right.
so on. And so I went and got a degree. Now, at the same time, I was already working as an interpreter and translator. I got a call. I was, I think, a sophomore, yeah, 1989. So it must have been, I guess, my sophomore year. And we had these high-rise dorms with, these concrete cells for two students and inmates and students. No air conditioning, and the heat went on like April 15th, and the heat went off on March 15th, and went on October 15th, and so on. And there's one phone in the hallway, right? This is, again, it's the late 80s. We're talking about, for the millennials out there, we lived in the Stone Age. All right, it's amazing that I don't know how we entertained ourselves, right? Um, Much less did any work. So I hear something else. Hey, Rivers, it's for you. Okay, go out to grab the phone, and phone's ringing. It's at like 8 in the morning, which of course pissed everybody except the engineers off, because we were all getting ready to do class. We all had early morning classes. And I heard a voice on the line. Are you Bill Rivers? Yes. You're an engineering major? Yes. You speak Russian? Who is this? Oh, this is Professor Melnick. Oh, Professor Melnick. I'll bring the problem set by this afternoon. Really, no, 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 no. He was one of my professors, right? He knew who he was talking to, but he did all this. He was very silly. He said, come to my office a little early. I'm like, oh shit, what did I do? And I sure, yeah, что сделал? So I go to his office, and he says, do you want to be an interpreter? Well, a translator. He actually said,
Right.
do you want to be a translator? So there's this. So the University of Maryland is about 5 miles from NASA Goddard, which is where the control center for all of NASA's Earth science
Mhm,
missions,
mhm.
right? And they have all these satellites that circle the, weather satellites and all sorts of different research satellites looking at the atmosphere and the Earth and everything else, and geophysics and oceans. And so it's 1989. It's also the era of perestroika and
Yep.
glasnost. So you have Mikhail Gorbachev,
Hmm.
who's the premier of the Soviet
Mhm.
Union, and the ruble was still pinned. So there was no floating exchange rate.
Mm.
All of a sudden, there were these joint Soviet-American space projects and money to do them,
Wow.
right? Because the American Congress was, you know, we always have some money for space exploration, but never as much as an aerospace engineer thinks it
Yeah,
should
of
be.
course.
Um, so I say, sure. There's an upcoming um, treaty negotiation over a new satellite project. Would you like to be translator, quote unquote? I said, sure. Well, call this lady here at this number, and she'll tell you when, where to go and what to do. And 2 weeks later, and she gives me a very brief interview. I can't remember her last name. Her first name was Natalia. Um, Very brief interview. Decided my Russian was good enough. Now, mind you, I had never taken a day of any coursework in translation or interpreting, and I knew nothing of what
Wow.
I was
Hmm.
doing. The first day I walk in, I'm handed a microphone at 8 in
Wow.
Oh,
the morning
no.
and put on stage between there's the director of NASA, there's the director of the Institute Kosmических исследований, Soviet Space Institute, translate their speeches.
Oh my
Wow.
god.
And that was my
How
instruction,
did you not
right?
just, like,
With a
die
mic,
right then?
just standing there with a mic.
Wow.
And I BS my way
Hmm.
through it, bluffed my way through it,
Uh-huh,
I guess.
uh-huh.
It was clear that the American had never worked really with an interpreter because he would go on for
Wow.
paragraphs at a time, right? I don't even have a notepad. Like, it occurred to me a couple minutes in, I bet interpreters take notes when
Right.
they're doing this,
Yeah.
And the Soviet space director would go 3 sentences, boom, 3 sentences. It was very, very clear and to the point. And so after that experience, I may have had an out of body experience when I was doing it. I'm stuck in a working group. I'm at a table, and it's this big. It's like a hotel conference room, but it's on the NASA site, and it's tables set up in rounds with 6 or 8 people around them, and I'm interpreting and translating at the table, handwritten translations. And this was like the orbital mechanics
Mhm.
table, all the different systems of the spacecraft are meeting around different tables, and then at lunch, I'm asked to go up to the head table. I'm a 20-year-old college student.
Man.
What are you doing with lunchtime there? And go up to the head table and can you sort of sit between the two and quietly
Oh
translate? So I
my
was doing
gosh.
shushutage,
Oh.
and then later in the day, I'm taken to a booth and handed a headphone and show how these pedals and stuff operated and switches
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
and so that wasn't the kicker. The kicker was the end of the day. Now I've been doing this for like 10 hours. I'm
Oh my
completely exhausted,
goodness.
right?
Imagine.
My brain is toast. I get a sheaf of handwritten loose leaf paper, some of it in English, some of it in Russian. This is our draft protocol. Can you bring back a copy in both
Hmm.
languages tomorrow morning? Now,
Oh.
how did this happen? This happened because, and so I do all this, then 2 more days of work. I submit an invoice. At least I knew enough to submit an invoice. Like, how am I going to get paid? But, my mother told me you got to submit an invoice. And so I filled out a rudimentary invoice, on a typewriter,
Mhm.
with a carbon, so I had a
Oh,
copy,
good.
and sent it off. And 2 weeks later, the check comes in the mail, and a week after that, it bounces.
Oh, no.
Again, it's the Stone Age, boys and girls. There's no ACH going
Oh,
on here, right?
God.
There's no app to take a picture of your check and deposit it sitting in the
Right,
comfort of
Yeah.
your
right.
home. So then it bounces, and I go to the address on the
Mhm.
check. They've moved and left no
Oh
forwarding address.
no.
so
No.
so it was like a microcosm of all of the bad stuff, all the crap that can happen to
Yeah.
me. An unscrupulous industry, an unscrupulous agency, completely untrained and exploited independent
Oh my
contractor. Although I thought what
goodness.
I was making, it was $200 a day, which was probably still a fraction of what the real rate should have been for conference
Right,
interpreting at that
right.
level. But I thought for 20 years old in 1989, and they fed
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
breakfast was all you can
Oh,
eat.
man.
So, but that started, and I did that for another 7 years. So I went to another professor of mine,
But you got paid for the next
Dick
7
Brackett,
years though, right?
and
You got paid.
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh
Oh
Okay.
wow.
yeah, yeah. I made sure.
Okay,
And so
good.
I'm telling him this tale of woe, and he looks at me and says, "Bill, you're an idiot." okay.
Why?
Professor Brecht, you're not the first nor the last who's ever said that. Hasn't been said yet to me today, but I'm sure it will
Let's
at some
hope
point
not.
during the day. So you need to go learn something about translation and interpreting. You could take my class.
Mhm.
And he actually taught a very good translation class. This is again 1989,
Yeah, it's
so nobody's got a
yeah,
translation
yeah.
memory and nobody's using
No,
cattails, you
no.
know. And then eventually, he said, "Why don't you go join the ATA?" Which I did a couple of years later,
Mhm, mhm.
and that was sort of the entry into that. Now, in the meantime, the reason I got out of it was in part that the rates collapsed. I was in a very lucrative niche because in the late '80s there were very few people who could do any kind of technical or legal work in
Right.
Russian.
Right.
There were a few expatriates who were mostly quite a bit older by that time, and then the wall falls and the Soviet Union falls,
Mhm,
and all of a
mhm,
sudden there are tons of not just highly qualified, but super well
mhm.
trained and super experienced interpreters and translators from the former Soviet Union. In that market, the rates went down everywhere as tools came online and as throughput increased.
Mhm.
But I did that for till I guess '95 when I went off to get a
Yeah.
PhD. And I had always ended up being an academic
Mhm,
and
mhm.
not ever really a professor. I got into the think tank, the National Foreign Language Center, and then
Mm,
after 9/11, co-founded the Center for Advanced Study of Language, which was a CASTLE, which was a NSA-funded university-affiliated research
mhm,
center,
mhm,
national
mhm.
lab for language cognition and national security. One of my major responsibilities there was overseeing the translation and interpreting research thread. And that was a significant amount of work, as you can
Oh, yeah.
imagine, especially after
Yeah.
9/11. We had a lot of
Mm.
projects on how do we improve testing, training, and analysis. How do we improve workflows? How do we better integrate language
Right.
technology into those workflows and things like that?
And for our listeners,
And then I did advocacy. And then
well, I was gonna say for our listeners
yeah,
also,
go ahead.
no,
Sorry.
no, sorry to cut you off here, but for our listeners, I want people to understand that one of the things that language advocacy also has to deal with, in anybody that is working in this realm, like Bill is that people assume like what you're talking about. People assume you could just pull somebody bilingual off the street and say, "Here, you can interpret, you can translate," and it doesn't matter if they have any background. And as we've all just listened to, it's exhausting work, it's highly trained work, and not anybody can just do it even if you happen to speak a second language, because you have to be able to write and speak well in a second language, not and think in that other language and know the nuances of language. And then on top of it, like he was saying, this is the Stone Age before we had all these computer aided tools, the cat tools he was speaking about to help with translation. And we didn't have online, and even just till recent, we didn't have a lot of video remote and telephonic interpreting that was incredibly successful and nationwide. And so these are the things during the late 80s, even though for the younger listeners or even people our own age listening, it doesn't sound like it might have been that long ago, but in terms of our industry, the technology was just not there. So for you to have done this, and then, of course, you go on to get your PhD, but to have that base and that experience, like you said, to see the negative side of the industry, that must have really changed your perspective on moving forward on what you would have liked to have seen differently.
Well, I mean, it was 20s. I was 20 years old, so what perspective did I have on anything really?
True.
And I look at my own son, who's 19 now, and he's full of moxie and brio and confidence and a bit of swagger, and like, yeah, I was like that. And as an adult, you look at that and say, yeah,
Mhm.
I guess you needed a
Yeah,
change,
Yeah,
right?
you do.
you
It
too.
it didn't phase me at all. You know, I fell into something as yeah, bilingual grabbed off the street. And that bilingualism is the absolute prerequisite for the work. You
Hmm.
can't do it without knowing two languages to a
Right.
fairly high
Or you
level,
can
to a
try.
very high level. But the fact that translation, interpreting, language teaching are in and of themselves skills
Hmm.
and cognitive constructs
Hmm.
that are quite difficult. I mean, if you've ever taught a classroom and it's Thursday morning, 6 weeks into the semester, and like nothing is there, it's 8 in the morning, they're all tired, because at least the University of Maryland, a lot of them are working, two
Yeah.
jobs to put themselves through
Yeah.
school,
Yep.
and nothing is clicking, nothing is working. You're not holding their interest. They want to be anywhere they actually want to be either back in bed or having a nice cup of coffee, so
Mhm.
somewhere slowly waking up. And how do you reach how do you reach them, right? And
Mhm.
that's a separate. It's a whole. There's real. There's a lot of science behind all of these things: translation, interpreting,
Yeah.
teaching, localization, translocation, etc. There's a lot of subtlety and art to it as well, and I think
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
why as much as like when Bill Wood, the late Bill Wood, DS Interpreting founder,
Mhm.
at the first Interpret America said, interpreters who are not going to be replaced by technology, but interpreters who refuse to learn how to use technology
Mm.
will be
Yes.
Wow.
replaced.
Good quote.
And Jos Zecchi said something very similar about 20 years
Mhm.
ago in a keynote panel at
Mhm.
ATA in the early aughts, in the same exact thing when people were bemoaning the use of computer assisted
Mhm.
translation, much less now where we have neural MT and deep neural MT engines that can do a lot of the basic work
Mhm.
for us. But yeah, so even then, it's still there's essentially an absolute requirement for most use
Right.
cases in translation localization for a human to be not just in the loop but in
Exactly.
control. And when you look at the use of neural machine translation, most of these very complex algorithms do a bad job with
Mhm.
negation,
Mhm.
right? Il n'est pas là. Il n'était pas là. Was he there or not? Right?
Mhm.
It's a coin toss in some of these systems.
Right.
Right.
They do a bad job with gendered third person pronouns and third person possessives,
Exactly.
which work very differently. Even in Russian, the gender of the possessive, there is no gendered third person possessive, but in French, it agrees with the
Mhm.
noun, not with the
Mhm.
subject,
Mhm.
not with the pronoun or the subject. In sense, it agrees with the gender of the object, and that can cause enormous confusion. Just as an example, and these are well publicized things.
Right.
The other thing that Neural MT does, that it is absolutely true, that in highly dense language pairs with lots of data, language pairs with lots and lots of
Mhm.
data, it'll produce fluent output in a relatively restricted set of domains because of where the data come
Mhm.
from. When you go back all the way to the creation of the first stochastic machine translation programs in the late 90s, they worked on the Canadian parliamentary corpus
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
then on the European parliamentary corpus. So you're not talking, it's a fairly limited domains, and it's a fairly formal register. When you get into less well-resourced
Mhm.
languages,
Mhm.
then you get all sorts of weird things can happen,
Right.
right? Even with good neural MT systems. So that's one issue. And the second issue is if the vectors don't, if the system can't solve a particular vector,
Mhm.
it will often skip.
Right.
And that means you can have gaps in
Mhm.
text,
Mhm.
right? And if you don't have a human who understands both of those texts, both of those cultural contexts, both of those languages, and at least look at it and say, "Whoops,
Right.
oops, that ain't right."
Yeah, because then
Um,
you end up with these blank pieces and you have to have that human to fill that in.
so, so all that's by way of saying that the technology has been amazing, and watching this industry pivot, especially for
Mhm.
remote interpreting, in roughly May, June of
Mhm. Mhm.
2020, everything
Right.
collapsed in March, and by the summer, a lot of our interpreting companies were billing at or above where they were at that point in
Yep.
2019. And the reason for that was we were able to pivot. If
Mhm.
this had
Mhm.
happened 5 years ago, I think a lot of companies would have been
Mm.
wiped
Oh,
out, and a lot of interpreters would be doing something else for
I
a living
agree.
now because the
Yeah.
technology wasn't
Yeah.
ready. You
Well,
know,
I completely agree with
and
that because I mean,
and when
go ahead.
well, so when it comes to language access, and advocacy. So right, so I'm really here to talk about
Right.
advocacy, not to tell
Yeah.
stories about
No,
my
no, no.
past.
But we're
Which,
going to talk about all of it because I have some questions about advocacy.
yeah, okay,
Well, go ahead. Go ahead and finish your thought, and then I'm going to ask a
all
big
right.
whopper.
So among us lobbyist types, there's a saying that the data make us credible, the stories make us memorable, and what we have in the language industry are just tremendous stories, and it actually makes it much easier to advocate. And my role is really to help people advocate for themselves. I'm paid when one of the other points that I know Melissa's heard me say before. In the United States, the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to petition the government for redress of grievance, to ask our elected officials and their appointed people to do their jobs, to take actions on our behalf. And when you do that, you are advocating. You're not lobbying. When you're standing up to the town council, the school board, the state legislature, the Congress, and asking for something, you are advocating. When I'm paid to help you do that, then I'm a lobbyist. So that's the distinction. And sometimes lobbyist gets there's a some connotations of that can be unpleasant. There's also a distinction between the big time K Street lobbyists, guns for hire, who'll take any client on, which it's maybe a little unfair to paint them that way, and the people who do lobbying like me on behalf of a trade council or on behalf of a particular issue. In the end, the reason that you have someone like me involved is that you think about the average member of the House of Representatives. They have 5 staffers, 5 or 6. They have to vote on everything under the sun. It might be gun control, and then fisheries policy, and then our border with Canada, and then national defense, and then and no one person can ever master all of the things they need to vote on, nor can their staff. So they rely on the citizenry and people like me who help groups like the ALC. They rely on us to give them information, to give them ideas. We're not, but ALC and as an organization and WP Rivers as a company, we're not doing the kind of lobbying that's going to bring thousands of votes in or tons of campaign cash into somebody's coffers. We're not that kind of lobbying. This is very much, we have the power of moral suasion. We have the story that we tell about how our industry benefits national security, economic growth, and social justice.
Right.
And we go tell that story. And the technology is totally a part of it. That's how I got to this, because we're talking about
Exactly.
technology. It's like,
So
maybe I should bring this back to advocacy. Let's see if I can do that.
right.
Maybe not.
No, it's fascinating because I think for our listeners, I think, and for Richard, who has had less experience listening to you speak and working with you, this is newer information for him, and I'm sure
Right.
you might have some questions.
I do.
Go
I
ahead,
do.
go ahead.
Well, the thing it keeps coming into my head and listening to your bio, it really seems like you have a lot of passion, and passion's a big word for me in working. Where does your passion come from that you keep moving forward in this
So
and pushing this agenda?
I don't rightly know, and I say that advisedly. Having always had more than one language in my head. When I came to the U.S., I was born in Germany. My parents were stationed there. I come here as a toddler, and I had German and English as a toddler. I remember my patient, elderly
Yeah.
Irish grandfather looking at me in befuddlement when I was answering him in German to his questions. One of my first memories, actually. And so I have always had the sense of standing in multiple places at once, acknowledging, of course, that I'm primarily a white cisgendered,
Right.
nominally Christian American male, and all of the world historical privilege that accords me. Okay, but nevertheless, having these other cultural places to stand and these other ways of thinking, and as I've added languages
Right.
and having really 2 languages at professional level, in French and Russian, and having several other languages
Uh-huh.
at sort of an intermediate to advanced level, it's
Hmm.
part of my identity, and it's actually part of
Well, I
on the scale of the whole world.
Right.
Rather a large percentage of the
Hmm.
world is bilingual or multilingual, often out of necessity, right? And so in the U.S., it's
Right.
right.
for the Anglophone American,
Yes.
it's a choice, and I have a deep understanding, and not even understanding, it's an essential part of my being that I have this identity as being bilingual and multicultural, even though I don't look it. Um,
Right.
and
Right.
and I see the intrinsic value of that as part
Yes.
of my
Hmm.
Yes.
character, as part of my being. There are a lot of
I.
extrinsic values
Mhm.
to it, right?
Right.
Yes.
If you're
Yes.
bilingual, adult bilinguals, they
Hmm.
the average age of the onset of the symptoms of dementia is delayed by 4 years. So, sign me up. I'm
Hmm.
53. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
I see
Yeah.
that shit on the horizon. Oh, sorry,
Yes,
Lauren.
Hmm.
I do.
You
Yeah.
know, right. So, bilinguals make more money than monolinguals in the same line of work,
Hmm.
right? Bilingual kids graduate at higher rates, get better grades, go
Hmm.
to college at higher rates, et cetera, et cetera. Those are
Right.
all extrinsic things that help
Yeah.
make the case,
Hmm.
especially to monolingual listeners. You know,
Hmm.
Right.
um,
Hmm.
that investing in language services up front in the design of your product or service rather than at the
Hmm.
downstream end at the point of sale
Mhm.
provides an enormous
Right.
ROI, orders of
Yeah.
Mhm.
magnitude, more. Every dollar there was, I don't know if it was Apple or somebody else broken. They spent every dollar they spent on localizing their products for the Chinese market or the
Mhm.
European market was returned a dozen times over, right? Um,
Right.
that all of those are extrinsic factors that we can say this is the
Right.
value
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
language as the type of human capital, as an activity, the value of the language industry. There's an intrinsic value for at the individual level, but it's also
Mhm.
Yeah.
as
Mhm.
an industry, we make the world a better place. We make the world a better place,
Absolutely.
and that is
Yeah.
Absolutely.
it is. I don't want to say it's unique because there are probably other industries that do this as well, but it is
Mhm.
relatively rare. That pretty much
Mhm.
everything we touch is and everything we do is for the greater good.
Well,
That's
I want to
awesome.
just jump in there and Richard,
Mhm.
I know we're both chomping at the bit to
Yes.
just scream the word out, but go ahead.
No,
Just
you say it.
well, you like us are a TCK.
You know
You
that?
are a third culture kid, man.
Third culture
Uh-huh.
kid.
And that exact definition about making the world a better place and having the empathy and the passion that you have, that is exactly a characteristic of third culture and what you are, which is an adult third culture kid. The way that you were born here, raised there, speak all these other languages, have all these experiences that have molded who you are, and now you have passion for the language industry because you've lived it and understand it, but also recognize the fact that we in the industry who are also TCKs do bring good to the world, make it a better place, have empathy, push the agenda to have a better life and all the other extrinsic things. But the intrinsic part, we just did an episode
Yes.
on this and you'll hear it coming out, but we were talking about TCKs in a three-part episode and I kept going back to the word empathy, and I
Mhm.
know Richard's talking about passion, but what you're talking about is empathy,
Empathy, right?
and you just can't get away from that
Mhm.
when you're in that unique situation. And like you said, Bill, you can't just bilingualism is the number one key for being in this industry.
Yeah, what resonated with me with your answer is the when you talked about your formative years, what happened when you were a kid. To me, that it defines third culture kids because the other kids don't have that when they were
Mm-mm.
young.
No.
So it really makes sense to me where your passion and your empathy comes from.
Hmm.
Yeah. So then the next question, because I was going to ask you if you were a natural polyglot, but maybe it's because you were raised in different places and had these experiences, or do you just find that that languages come easier for you?
It's a chicken and egg question, right? And it's actually in my bio. There is that one throwaway line about third language acquisition where I did a lot of research.
Right.
Hmm.
Knowing two languages, if you know two languages to a pretty high level of proficiency, makes learning additional languages much easier. And that's
Hmm.
because it may be like going from French to Spanish or
Hmm.
Spanish to
Hmm.
Portuguese. There's a
Hmm.
lot of transfer, shared vocabulary, very similar, grammatical systems. But even then, there are structural changes brought about in the brain,
Hmm.
in particular in an area called the frontier anterior cingulate corpus that controls attention and your management of your time, the
Hmm.
management of your attention, and that's a much stronger region in bilinguals. It's actually quite bigger and has a lot more blood flow and more neurons. And the hypothesis is that these changes like that, and the sort of redundant neural networks that are built around vocabulary categories make it easier to acquire additional languages.
Right. Right.
I don't know that there's anything like a natural polyglot. You could talk to like Michael Lerard, who's written
Hmm.
about this.
Hmm.
He's a journalist who covers the space, and
Okay.
much more interesting than I am.
I
Um,
don't know.
I mean, it's easy. It's easy to pick up a few words or phrases
Sure.
in a bunch of languages. Like I can say hello, thank you, and I would like a beer in probably 20
Which is a
languages.
really important thing to be able to
Yo
know to
deseo
say.
uma cerveza,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right. You know, but to actually be able to hold a meaningful conversation, or to stand up in front of a crowd, students or colleagues,
Right.
and give a talk, that's a much different level
Right.
of time and attention.
Right.
One of the persistent myths about learning a language is only kids can do it. Well,
Mhm.
Yes.
there's a reason we have that myth. First off, if you have kids of your own, you'll notice their first 3 to 5 years are spent learning how to get their needs met, learning how to communicate
Right.
with
Mhm. Mhm.
these large beings around them,
Mhm.
Mhm.
right? And it takes roughly 7 years, plus or minus a bit, depending on the kid and the language
Right.
involved, for a child to master all of the basic grammatical
Mhm.
concepts in
Right.
the language. And then some of us spend the rest of our lives trying to improve our communication skills in our native language,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
It's like, but you don't remember how hard it was to learn your first language
Mm-mm.
Mhm.
because you don't remember being a toddler very much. Once you are past this critical period in early adolescence, it can be a little harder if you are a monolingual to acquire native like phonology pronunciation
Mhm.
in a second language. A little harder. It
Mhm.
takes more work.
Mhm.
Mhm.
If you have two languages, there's a lot of evidence. You're bilingual before you hit basically
Mhm.
mid puberty,
Yeah.
then learning additional languages is going to be easier because your brain is wired to expect some
Like,
differences. Like that R
mhm.
in English
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
that R in Quebecois
Right.
French is
Right.
going to be different from the R in Parisian French, that
Oh, yeah.
R versus the R,
Mhm.
Yeah.
front or back,
Right.
Yeah.
And there's in certain East Asian languages, the R and the L are actually kind of in between,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's why it's a common trope. People make fun of East Asian accents and people mispronouncing their L's and the R's because I can't remember if it's Korean or Chinese. There's only one, and it's
Mhm.
it's in between
Mhm.
the two sounds that we have.
Right.
But if you are multilingual at an early age, bilingual at an early age, your brain has an easier time resetting these
Yeah.
parameters, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a long way to rant to no, I'm not a natural bilingual. I've worked really hard in all of my languages,
Mhm.
um,
Good.
and I see that I was recently had some correspondence in French with some colleagues, and I'm like, oh man, it's so full of mistakes. Just oops, oops, oops. It's like spell check.
Oh.
Oh, do not rely on spell check.
I know.
Not in any
Oh,
language.
I
Not in any
know. I
language.
know.
Um, or even in it's just I just put it down to the fact that I got straight F's in typing in junior high school, and I'm still a terrible typist. But in all honesty, I enjoy. It's like I find this just visceral pleasure in learning another
Yeah.
Yeah.
language, and yeah, it's kind of like a hobby, like learning Irish, which is my current project.
Okay.
Wow.
That is, it's. I have relatives in the far west of Ireland who
Yeah.
are native speakers of Irish.
Wow.
What
They're all
area?
by
What area?
um, the Hochawhinya, the ring of the Dingle Peninsula,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
villages
Okay,
of
that's what I was thinking. My best friend from high school moved to Dingle. She lives in Dingle with her husband. He's a
Wow.
chef, and
yeah.
they live there now,
So
and
you go
they
over the
love it.
mountains, and you go over the mountain from Dingle into Dún Quinn and Anvoisin, Ballyferriter, and David, which is actually Ballynanal. They're all of those. That is like a completely Irish speaking area.
Wow.
Wow.
It's not going to
Wow.
get me a job. I'm
Yeah.
only travel there infrequently.
Mhm.
I could.
Mhm.
Do I need it to get around? No.
Mhm.
But it's opened up another literature to me. It's opened up another way of thinking about the world.
Wow.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Fascinating.
the enormous vocabulary in that part of Ireland
Mhm.
for describing anything related to the weather,
Mhm.
particularly rain,
Uh-huh.
and the sea,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Many
And and
ways to
and
describe it.
and to me, that's so I come at there are a lot of people in the industry who are not themselves linguists, who are great advocates for the industry,
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
wonderful
Yeah.
people.
Right.
But I do come at this from a different place where, yeah, or somebody like Kathleen Diamond, who grew up bilingual, for example, and
Right.
added additional languages. It is part of who I am
Yeah.
Mhm.
that has led me into this work.
Right, right. And so on that, going back to advocacy and about the things that are going on in our industry, I want to make sure that we address some of that as well while we have you here. I want you to express to our listeners what is the the biggest issue that we're facing right now in the United States government, or maybe you have something you think on a global level that people should know about that is either a bill that's been introduced or a law that's been introduced that you are either fighting or advocating acceptance for. Is there something that you're really in that realm super passionate you're fighting right now?
Yeah. So most of what we do has been. I'd like to think most of what we do is actually positive fighting for things, but in point of fact, the last 3 years or so, especially at the state level, we've been fighting laws that make it very difficult to classify our workforce as independent independent contractors as opposed to regular employees. And I've got a bunch of calls this afternoon on an effort in Oregon and an ongoing effort in California to try and push back against some of the things that have been forced upon us. We're fighting. There's sort of two issues on the table right now. There are a number of lower priority issues that we're also working on, but the two highest priorities are, on the one hand, worker classification and the attempts by various Democratic state legislatures as well as the Democrats in Congress
Hmm.
to basically make anybody who does any work for anybody anywhere in the United States an employee as opposed
Hmm.
to an independent contractor, making it much more difficult to classify
Mhm.
workers as independent contractors.
Hmm.
That is extremely bad for our industry,
Mhm.
as we know, it's 80% at least of the translation and interpreting workforce are independent contractors. I
Mhm.
know that it sounds like you're going to have Richard Antoine on as a guest fairly soon. He's done surveys over the years showing that roughly 80% of those independent contractors wish to remain as independent contractors.
Hmm.
Right.
And so we're pushing back against that at the state level in California. We've been participating in hearings of the California Advisory Committee on Civil Rights to the U.S. National Commission on Civil Rights, examining the impact of AB5 on civil rights in California. AB5 is the bill that was passed in California
Mhm.
that makes it very difficult to be an independent contractor. We fought for exemptions and eventually got a good exemption for translators and a not so great exemption for interpreters.
Right.
We're taking part in that. There are hearings of the U.S. Department of Labor coming up on a proposed rule that would again make it hard to classify people as independent contractors under one of the 15 different federal laws that govern employee, employer, and contractor relationships.
Wow.
So yes,
Yeah.
we're very active in that.
Hmm.
And then that's sort of the fighting back part.
Yeah.
The
Right.
fighting for something is we're advocating for funding for language access. So language access in the United States is it's a civil rights requirement under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yep.
It
Hmm.
is a requirement under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, Section 1557. Anybody who gets basically any health care in the U.S. and needs language access are supposed to get the language access.
Right.
Hmm.
Anybody who gets any kind of service from any federally funded program, and almost every municipal and state program receives federal funding, is required to have language access provided at no cost. Problem is,
Mhm.
there's no funding
Mhm.
for that language access, and so
Mm.
that becomes
Yeah.
an issue of compliance, like risk management on the part of the service provider. Are we in compliance with federal rules and regulations and federal laws
Right.
versus actual customer service and actual investment in your service?
Mm.
And it often ends up in overhead.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
as business owners, we all know that you minimize your overhead.
Right.
Because overhead's just overhead.
Hmm.
You're not making money on it.
Right.
So what we're advocating for is something called the Health Equity and Accountability Act, which was introduced on April 26th, and by a number of Democrats. And one of the provisions of that act, in fact, Title III of that act, would radically improve language access in healthcare. It would require federal funding for language access in Medicare, Medicaid, and other federally funded
That's great.
or federally backed
That's
healthcare
fabulous.
plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would
Yeah.
require private insurers to reimburse language access. It would require the creation of a billing code for language access. All of these things that would, and we work very closely with a broad coalition. In fact, I'm speaking to some of the coalition later today on this bill to get these provisions in, and some of us have been working on it for about 15 years. We
Yeah.
won't. This won't pass in this Congress, I don't think.
Mm.
Maybe we'll get pieces of it passed through
Mhm.
the appropriations bills for fiscal 23 coming up.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
the fact that we're having this discussion at a high level in Congress for
Mhm.
the first time since Obamacare was
Mhm.
crafted,
Mhm.
which is now more than 10 years ago,
Mhm.
Mhm.
is really critical. So that
Yes.
eventually, in the next 5 years or so, we have a pretty
Mhm.
good shot of getting language access paid for.
Right.
And that, I think, will be a game changer for
Oh
the
gosh.
language
Yes.
access in healthcare.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things we found out in the pandemic in late March, early April of 2020, the CDC issued binding guidance,
Mm.
regulation, I guess, in emergency, that if you couldn't bring anybody with you to the doctor's appointment
Mhm.
unless you needed it for mobility assistance,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, And so all of a sudden, our OPI vendors in companies like Language Line, I'm
Mhm.
not saying they said this to me, but companies like Language
Mhm.
Line and Certified
Mhm.
reported a spike
Mm,
in their billing from major healthcare
mhm.
providers. And the reason was the family and friends plan for language access no longer worked.
Right.
And it was a tacit admission by some fairly large and fairly sophisticated healthcare systems that, yeah, we were skating.
Yep.
You know,
Mhm.
Yep.
we're using the family and friends plan,
Yep.
even though the law says we're not supposed to
Yep.
do it, even though the regulations say we're not supposed to do it except in
Right.
utterly exigent
Right.
circumstances. And with the kinds of SLAs that our OPI providers have, there's no excuse for an exigent
No.
circumstance. If we
No.
can provide 300 languages to you in 90 seconds, there's no excuse to use
Exactly.
Mhm.
the granddaughter to interpret for Abuelita in the emergency room. Okay,
Exactly. And let's
you
just
know,
be clear also, that granddaughter doesn't have the context, and the capacity to explain that, where these professional interpreters in the
right,
OPI community
right,
do. So, yeah.
or you know, bringing Mateus from down the block
Yeah,
to do your
exactly.
interpreting and paying him under the table, and he's
Yep.
doing that for everybody in the Polish neighborhood in Baltimore. And this actually happened
Oh,
a few years back.
man. Oh,
Mm,
man.
And their language access wasn't free.
No.
You know,
mhm.
No.
so we know that it's still a challenge, and just making this reimbursable
Mhm.
Yeah.
will vastly increase the
Right.
availability of language
Right.
access. And in fact, that's the biggest pushback
Mhm.
that we're
Mhm.
getting at the federal level. Like if we make this available, people will want it, and it will cost more.
Oh, God. Don't even get me
Oh,
started.
that
Don't even
is
get me started on
what
that.
that's so hypocritical.
But I
Completely.
think it would make a
Hypocritical.
big. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just government works in its own ways, but it's also, I think, would make lives a lot better for companies and interpreters. If we're not fighting hospitals and healthcare systems and state agencies to give us a slightly larger chunk of a relatively small amount of money. If there's more money on the table,
Right.
ideally that will end up in the pockets of the workforce and the pockets of the
Yeah,
companies.
and that's the part that I don't think people understand, because that was, come some of my follow-up questions. You've already addressed them about what people don't get about language advocacy, and you've just covered that. And what we want people to know more in our industry, um, is specifically to this manner, because we have constitutional rights. But aside from that, going back to the empathy part of it, those of us who are in this industry, we know that to make this world a better place, we have to have access to language. We have to provide this for people, because if we don't, we're going to end up in this horrible situation where there's more lawsuits are going to happen, and it's going to cost more money for hospitals to pay out, but in a different manner. Whereas they could completely cut that part out of it by avoiding those lawsuits and having people actually get the care and the needs met in the moment by professionals, and have also, I think, finally the American people recognize our industry as a professional industry, because I think that's something that people don't get, hands down. They just don't. And unless you're working in the industry, they don't get it.
To the extent that it's visible, it's been we've been very visible during COVID with all of the state governors giving briefings with an ASL interpreter. So
Yeah.
that's been actually kind of good for consciousness raising.
Right.
But to the extent that the average person thinks about it, they conflate translation and interpreting, and I've long since given up. I'm sorry to every translator and interpreter out there, and I'm one of both. I've long since given up the effort to try to educate on that. It's just,
Oh,
they're going to
yeah.
conflate that, and in a lot of languages, like in Russian, it's one word, переводчик. Okay,
Oh, didn't
um,
know that.
yeah, it's устный перевод, oral interpretation and translation, устный перевод versus письменный перевод,
Okay.
written, oral versus written. And you say
Okay.
переводчик is one word, covers everything. Or they think of the interpreter with Nicole Kidman. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
yep, yep. It's not quite like that. I do not look like any of the interpreters in that film, and I don't never lived a lifestyle like theirs.
I know. Oh my
But
god, wouldn't that be nice though?
yeah,
Except the part where they were trying to kill her. That wouldn't be a good part. That wouldn't be a good part. Some espionage thing going on there.
yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, listen,
What's
hey.
the Italian? What's
Yeah,
traduttore, right?
yeah, right.
Um,
Exactly.
translator, trader.
Mm.
Exactly. Well, I'm good. Okay. I'm first of all, you know me, I'm a big fan. So I love Bill that I love listening to you talk. I love listening to you educate. It's just so evident how passionate you are and how much you've spent time. This is not just something that you're just like throwing off, out of your voice. Like you think about these things. It's you. We can tell.
Yes.
So I want to go more now a little bit for my last couple of questions to Bill the person. So I have a couple of fun questions for you. So this one is if you have one book in the rest of your life that you get to take with you and bring along and you don't get any other books. Which book and in what language and why?
One book?
One book.
That's not fair.
I know.
One book. Um, right now, it's Untalana, The Islandman by Thomas Crowan. It's an Irish
Okay.
book,
Mhm.
but that's only because I'm learning Irish. If you take that out, I'm cheating here. It'd probably be Masari Margarita by Bulgakov. It's a Russian
Okay.
book, and it's a satire of early 20th century culture in every
Mm.
imaginable way. I mean, it takes on communism and capitalism and fascism in very funny
Wow.
lyrical ways. But yeah, it's one book. It's hard.
Those are some good books there, right
It's
there.
hard.
No, that's totally fine. No, that's
Yeah.
great. Okay. And then also what do you do for fun? Reading, traveling. What do you do?
Well, I mean, used to travel, but that's obviously been harder, and now I'm like way more conscious of um, the climate
Yeah.
change impact of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So we're much more conscious about that in our family
Mhm.
Mhm.
travels. Um, so that's not now done with some guilt, right?
Yep, I get it.
Um, and obviously not very much in the last
Right.
Mhm,
2
mhm,
years. What do I do for fun? I do a lot of reading. I read L'actualité, which is a Montreal-based monthly things like New Yorker.
mhm.
I've been reading a lot of biographies of U.S.
Oh.
Grant,
Mhm.
just as a kind of corrective for all the stuff that's happening in the
Mhm,
country.
mhm.
Just trying to go back to the narrative where the correct side won the Civil War. Um, I'm doing a lot of Irish.
That's good
That's
though.
great.
Learn languages
Yeah,
for
but
That's
fun,
see,
awesome.
you know.
that's great though. I mean, I don't think that that's I'm not expecting you to say, "Well, I go mountain climbing" or anything like that. I mean, I feel like all of us who are
Oh, I used to
did
do
you?
that. I used to do that, but no. Yeah, I used to. I gave up rock climbing when I started to have a family
Ah,
because
yeah.
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 you know,
I get that.
it's what's the last thing that goes through a rock climber's mind as he
Yeah.
falls?
Yeah.
His knees.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
that's like why Michael, my
That's an
husband.
old. That's an old one. That's not original.
No, no, it's to the point because Michael has always said he wanted to go skydiving and I'm like, you're not going skydiving. You can go skydiving when you have like maybe 3 years left. Like he's like, well, George Senior did it. I'm like, yeah, he was like what 90. I'm like, sure, go when you're 90. I could accept that, because that means I'm going to be 93. But don't don't do it now. Please don't do it now. But yeah, I get that, and I'm really actually glad you mentioned about the impact of travel with climate change because that's another whole other conversation that we may be doing a podcast on because it's so incredibly important for people to understand that. And right now we're seeing post COVID all of the just amazing amount of mobility that's happening in
Hmm.
the airlines that they're actually canceling flights because there's just not enough staff to
Mhm.
work
Yeah.
everything. And then I read something where they were talking about smaller airlines were going to start doing one pilot manned flights, and I'm
Mm.
like, what? No, I'm not going on that.
Yeah.
And then you're dumping everything out of the air into the ground and the ocean and just the heat that it's causing, with all
Mhm.
of impact of immediate transportation running again. That was, I liked it. I personally, I know this is horrible, but I know the pandemic was horrible for many reasons. But I love the fact that things were growing again, and you could see Los Angeles
You
without
see the
smog.
skies. Yeah.
You know,
Blue skies.
blue skies
Yeah.
everywhere. So yeah, it is a definitely, I agree with you, it's a guilty pleasure now to do heavy travel. um but yeah, that's why I think I'm going to focus on traveling. I'm going to try doing the Camino de Santiago, Bill. So if I'm gone for weeks at a time, that's where I'm at. Well, we do have one more question. Producer Lauren wants to know her burning desire to know, what do you think is going to be the future? Actually, producer Lauren, come over to my microphone and just put it in here for him. Here, I'm going to just pass my mic to her.
Hello, Bill.
Hi.
Hi. I just have a question about what do you think all of this means for the future of language advocacy? How do you see this in the next, maybe, let's say, 10 years from now? What do you think is going to be the main focus if it's continuing to build access to language advocacy? I know there's a lot of hot topics right now that we never foresaw, and we can't really see the future. We don't have a crystal ball, but just with your knowledge in this field, I'm really curious about if you've thought about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, what does this look like?
Sure. So, what will things look like in 10 years? I'm sure we'll see some technological advances that will look completely obvious in retrospect, that will increase our productivity and our ability to reach new audiences. I expect we will see some advances, in fact, in the application of computational linguistics, machine
Hmm.
translation, et cetera, to the processing of spoken text. We're already starting to see this with some of the automatic
Hmm.
captioning services. Whether that will really change, say, language access for healthcare is um, very much an open question. I would like to see us bring about funding for language
Right.
access in the states, and I'd also like to see, and this is a part of the reason we have an ALC and a Gala and other organizations, like to see companies, large enterprises, whether it's a private sector, public sector, um, do a better job of integrating language and culture upfront into the design and delivery of their products and services, rather than dealing with
Hmm.
ad hoc, post facto, downstream. So, wow. The point being that, in terms of things, changes we might be able to affect, is funding for language access for sure in the states, and raising awareness for enterprise level clients of ours, with the private or public sector, that they need to integrate
Hmm.
language and culture into the design and delivery of their products and services, rather than deal with it as a downstream commodity. And we need to change that.
You're back. You're back.
I'm
Okay.
back.
Downstream
My
commodity.
my Wi-Fi is, yeah. We don't want to be a downstream commodity. So that's that. I won't belabor it because my Wi-Fi is not cooperating. I suspect I've got a kid indoors who's doing Minecraft right now
Ah, okay.
and does not understand that the way that we pay the bills that allow her to play Minecraft is that we need the Wi-Fi. So,
All right. Well, I will say that that's a technology issue that we all face, regardless if we're in the language
yep.
industry or not. And I completely empathize with that. I've been there, done that. But I just wanted to thank you again for being our first ever guest on Translate This. And I just, it's been a pleasure, and it continues to be a pleasure every time I get to speak with you. And please, we'll go ahead and of course want you to let other people comment on this, because I know that you have a big fan base. So we're hoping that all of our listeners out there who are unaware of our guest, we will put our information up on our site, and how to directly affect change with him. If you are a language service company, we will give you an ALC email that you can directly email to Bill and ask him questions about the work he's doing, and perhaps help join the fight, and the support that our industry needs. And other than that, Bill, I promise I won't put your personal stuff up there. So we won't do that.
Well, I'd like to thank you guys for having me on. It's a tremendous honor, and it's been great fun. But thank you
Thank you,
very
Bill.
much.
It's been very enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll see you at the summit.
Yep. See you soon.
Okay. Thanks,
Take
Phil. Talk
care.
to you
All
later.
right. Bye bye.
So, Richard, like I said, I knew you were going to love our first guest.
Yeah. Wow.
Um,
This is incredible. I mean,
yeah,
the knowledge and the activity, the direction is going,
right,
the drive. It's like very impressive.
right.
Very impressive.
I mean, let's put it this way. He would be successful in any industry he went in.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's an intelligent
Yeah.
being.
Yeah.
But I think for our listeners to understand that it takes a very special person
Mhm.
to also do this, but to also what he said, more people need to be doing and advocating and creating companies and creating enterprise that support language advocacy and access to language.
Yes.
It needs to be built on the beginning side and
Mhm.
not be thought of as an afterthought,
Right. Right.
because you know
I
how
get it.
that works, right?
Mhm.
And I want to.
I know what an afterthought is. Yeah, I kind of felt like that in public education for a
Right.
long time.
Right. That's what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. And I'm sure that some of your high school students,
Mhm.
you probably know that they were interpreting for their families when they shouldn't
Yeah.
have been.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it happens. You see it all the time. So,
Right. Right. And how many times
mhm.
have you been called into a principal's office to interpret for a family?
I
Too
just thought it
many?
was a part of my job.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Oh, grab that
Uh,
person. I mean,
yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
we've all been there.
Yeah.
Grab the language teacher. They
Hmm.
they know how to say that.
Right.
They know how to speak that language.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's fascinating, but I had never heard his story on how he arrived into the
Hmm.
industry. So that was really
Yeah.
fun for me.
It's really cool to hear his background
Yeah.
and to know where his drive came from.
Right.
I mean, I just like the human side of things, so
Me too.
I like hearing about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. Me too. And that's great. And again, a fellow TCK.
Hmm. There it
So
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's another one
We're gonna
right
just be
there.
thinking TCK.
I know.
You're TCK.
I know. I know how many times we're gonna have
Right.
people on there. We're just gonna be totally in that mindset. Oh my God, you're a
Yeah.
TCK. We have to
Yeah.
tell you this. And they're gonna be like, what? What is that? Do I have a
Yeah.
disease? What's happening? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, this has been
Wow.
another episode of Translate This
This
with
Richard.
and Melissa.
Enjoy, you guys out there.
Yeah, have a great one. Until next time, you can find us on social media at translatethe-podcast.com and translate this underscore podcast on Instagram and translate this underscore P at Twitter and translate this podcast on Facebook. I have memorized now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay.
All right.
Peace out, people.
All right. Take care.